Hey, um, this is going to be a series of videos that's going to teach you how to program. I am a computer science student and I'm learning how to program, and so I figured that it would be fun if I taught more people how to program, especially beginners who maybe aren't at the university level or don't want to take computers or don't want to pursue a computer education but want to learn how to program. So this is kind of going to be a fun series of videos where I will teach you how to program. Um, so before I guess I get into this is going to assume zero programming knowledge, this set of videos. Um, I can, when I make the future videos, I can put a link in the description of a good place to start out if you already have a little bit of coding experience, but I kind of only have this planned out for beginner basic type things. Um, and I and I guess yeah. So, but this does assume that you have kind of an idea on how to work your computer and some of the basics like that. So, um, to start out, this tutorial will kind of assume you're using a Unix-like environment. So any kind of like GNU Linux setup or Mac OS setup will be perfectly fine for you, but I realize that a lot of people are going to be on Windows, and that's still okay because there are ways to get a Unix like environment on Windows. So there will be links in the description on how to get that set up if you're on Windows, and I'm also going to make a video shortly after this one showing you how to get set up on Windows so things will work almost identically to how I'll be doing them in this kind of set of tutorials. So I guess to kind of give you an idea of what to expect before we get into setup and things like that. Um, so for this first kind of section where I'm going to be going over the basics, there's going to be 6 parts, and there might be different amounts of videos for each part. Like I guess I'm gonna try to go for 15 minutes each video, maybe more, maybe less. Just like I'll cut off at a good point to end, and then I'll title them like part one, video one, whatever. Okay, cool. So first thing you need, since we're going to be writing some code, we're going to need somewhere to type this code into. So there's all kinds of fancy programs that you've probably heard of, like Xcode and Visual Studio, if you've done a little bit of research about this. But you don't need those to program, and I think a lot of those features are going to get in the way and kind of, or maybe even be like a little crutch, and you won't fully learn what you could possibly learn when you're first starting out programming. So we're going to use some basic text editors for this. Now, text editors they've gotten advanced, and there's a lot of fancy features within them. Like you can I don't know. I don't want to get into any kind of crazy stuff, but there's some examples of things you could use. You could use Atom, Visual Studio Code, Sublime Text Editor, things like that. Those are all great. Also, I guess it's totally cool to use an IDE if you're comfortable with that. I'm just not going to cover that in this specific set of videos. So, the text editor that I want to use, or I'm going to be using, is called Visual Studio Code. So this is developed by Microsoft, and I actually really enjoy it, and I think it's great, and I use this for my coursework, and I've used this for professional engineering stuff at internships before, so this is great. Links will be in the description. It works on Mac, Linux, and Windows, and you'll see as we go that some of these features will be pretty fun. So another thing for if you're on Windows, I guess you have 2 options that I would recommend for getting set up. You have this Windows subsystem for Linux installation, which I'll have a guide on how to get to that in the description. And then also, if you're a little bit more adventurous, you could install Ubuntu Desktop, which is basically a different operating system. You can either install that in a virtual machine or in a partition on your hard drive if you're familiar with that. If not, don't worry about that. Okay, cool. So download Visual Studio Code and let's get that open. So Visual Studio Code, it will open you at this main page here. It's your welcome page. So all we need to do is new file. Okay, cool. So you can click here to get to your Explorer. This is pretty much all you need. You don't have to worry about these things. And yeah, so we have our file here. Okay, other thing that's going to be helpful that you're going to need to use for these videos is the command line. So the command line is probably really intimidating at first and can be scary, I'll admit, but you need like maybe 3 commands to go through these entire 6 parts, and I will show you them right now. So fun thing about Visual Studio Code is it has a terminal built in. So you can just go to this terminal here and click new terminal and you open this up. So as you can see down here we have our terminal, but you also have a terminal built into your computer. So if you have a Mac, you have the terminal app. You'll also have terminal apps on Linux devices. You have command prompt on Windows. That's not really what we're using, but if you installed Windows Subsystem for Linux, then you will want to open that, and that will be this. So basically the most important command that you'll need to know is cd, which stands for change directory. So you basically do cd and then whatever directory you want. So little shortcut, you have your home directory. That's what like is named after whatever your computer's named. So my account on my computer is named Greg, so I can just do cd like this, and then I end up at my home directory. So that's a good way to get home at any time. And then you can do ls, which is kind of shorthand for list, and that'll list what's in your home directory. And then we can do mkdir to create a directory, and so we'll just say make mkdir make directory. So all this should be pretty intuitive at this point, so we can just call this coding tutorial. That is not proper capitalization. Cool. And then now that we have this, we can do cd coding tutorial and ls, and it's empty because we just made that. So you have your change directory, list, and make directory. Okay, sounds good. So we are in this coding tutorial file, and we'll want to open that in Visual Studio Code. So can do that by doing open folder, and we can go to our home directory here, coding tutorial. Okay, perfect. So that's pretty easy. You should be able to navigate to where you're going there. Okay, so we have this up in Visual Studio Code. So now we can kind of get into writing code. So another thing I want to throw out, I'm going to be teaching this in C++. So C++ is a pretty difficult language, I'll admit. A lot of people would say not to use it to start out, and it's not good for beginners, but I would argue that C++ is the perfect first language, because C++ is a multi-paradigm programming language, so you can do a ton of different things with it. Plus, it is a kind of, well, it is a superset of C, not strict, but it is a superset of C and many modern programming languages like your Java, Swift, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, I guess C#, yeah, so those are all C family languages, so they're heavily inspired by the C syntax. So in the future, if you want to switch to a different language, it'll make it super easy because you have all of these concepts that you learned and in a familiar syntax. But this tutorial is really not enforcing syntax, and it's mostly enforcing the programming concepts. Okay, so we can click here to make a new file. We'll just call this our starting file, or we'll call it our main file. main.cpp. So all of your C++ files are going to end with .cpp. That's not required. You can name it whatever you want, but tradition is .cpp. There's also a few other acceptable ones, I guess, that are traditionally used, but that's cool to start out. So, so we'll just, I guess I'm trying to think of a good place to start, because we're at this blank file here, and I don't want to make anything too confusing. So, every file or every program in C++ has a main function, and you don't really need to worry about much of what this is. Just know that whatever code you write inside of here is what's run when the program starts. And I will create a little file for you to download that has some basic starter code, or you can just copy it from here, because it won't be many lines before the next tutorial that will what am I saying? Sorry. That will save you from being confused. So you just really don't have to worry about much for this first tutorial. But yeah, so we have this main file, and here's our code. But how do we get it to run on the computer? Well, now we need to go back to our terminal. So we have in Visual Studio Code, we opened it up, and fun thing about Visual Studio Code is it automatically opens this coding tutorial folder, because that's what we opened in Visual Studio Code. So yeah, that's cool. Okay, so how to make it so the computer can read this, because believe it or not, the computer doesn't actually just read your code and run it how you wrote it. So you need to use this kind of program called a compiler, which takes the words that you wrote in your code and makes it into a file that the computer can read. So the compiler that I'm going to teach in this video is called G++. It's stands for it's a member of GCC, which stands for GNU Compiler something, GNU Compiler Collection, I think. But that isn't important to know. But cool thing about that is it should come on every computer, at least every Linux and Mac OS computer, and it probably comes on Windows. I'm not super sure. I'm not a big Windows person, but when you install that Windows subsystem for Linux, you'll have it for sure. So to run G++, you want to run it from the command line. So you just type G++, that's the name of the program, and then the file, our code file that we want to compile, which is main.cpp. Another tip, you can hit tab to autocomplete some file names. And then you want the output file, so you do -o, that's a flag, and then we can just call it main.o. And it'll run for 1 second, and then as you can see here in the corner, we have our main.o, which is our output file. Now, how do we run that main.o file? Well, it's pretty easy for that too. So you do /main.o, just like that, and it runs. But it doesn't do anything because we don't have any code there yet. So that's it. That's our first basic tutorial. We really didn't write any code. The next one will actually get into coding. I just wanted to explain what this video is, so kind of an introduction, and also teach you about your text editor, a little bit of command line stuff, and compilers. So I guess I'll kind of give a kind of maybe not really homework, but just something that you could explore on your own if you're interested before the next video or in between videos. So for this one, I would say play around with your command line, play with those 3 commands I told you about. So cd, change directory, ls, list, and mkdir, make directory. Also get your text editor set up, make sure that G++ works. You can just do G++-v, and if it does something, then that means that you're all set. Also, if you're on Windows, watch the video on how to get set up on Windows. Okay, cool. So it was a good first video, and I think we just hit the 15-minute mark. So, so yeah, see you at the next one, and we'll get into actual coding.